So this panel we called AI is scaling and so is the cost. But who is paying the bill? And this is an emerging conversation that I'm not sure anybody knows exactly how to answer just yet. So the session is not about being for or against AI. It's about asking a far more practical question. As AI scales, and it is very rapidly, are we being honest about what it requires? And the intelligence revolution, in a way, has a physical address. Every data center consumes water, occupies land, reshapes a local energy grid. Every AI chip depends on minerals from somewhere. These considerations in the most rapid tech adoption in human history are more numerous than we may think. So the question really for this group here is, within the global conversation, is there also a local conversation in cities right now? How are data centers and the different aspects of building an AI-shaped world changing urban environments, changing social constructs, and changing the way we need to think about the cost of a technical and a technology revolution? So Gina, can I turn to you first? When you look at how AI infrastructure and the decisions around building AI infrastructure are being made, who decides, for example, on the siting of a data center? Who gets consulted? Who distorts the costs or absorbs the costs? And what's missing from that process as you see it today?
I think I want to leave everybody with one point, which is we are being lied to, right? And I'm going to just say it. A year ago, my team at the Minderoo Center for Technology and Democracy released a report that took big tech at its word, took their word at face value, basically said, let's go and look at those environmental reports that they're required now to file with the SEC in the US and say, what are they saying about their data center and AI expansion? And in their own legally mandated reporting, they say, we're blowing through our net zero goals. We're just leaving them behind. We can't do this. And so then, over the last year, we've heard this rhetoric in the UK that data centers are somehow growth opportunities for the UK, that the expansion and scaling of AI here in the UK is possible with our existing water and energy and grid connections. And don't worry, it's about growth and we'll be fine. And as an academic, as a researcher, I can't put these two things together. I can't put through that Google and Microsoft are saying they are, by 50 and 30% respectively, surpassing their own stated carbon goals with their data center expansion. And the fact that it's being sold here to people in the UK as pretty much cost data environmentally neutral. So something has to give. I think what has to happen as a matter of urgency is an understanding for all of us in this room and those watching to recognize that we are not getting the data we need to make the decisions that keep these choices as publicly accountable, right? So we can let the people who are making decisions on what's best for their companies make these choices, or we can make the choices that are right for our countries. And I know which side I want to vote with. The choice is clear. We need the data about what the true costs are and where those costs are being borne. We see it time and again. We see it in the Netherlands that local government was told by hyperscalers, don't worry, this is going to create jobs and it's not going to take any extra electricity off the grid. And they failed. We've got the evidence in other jurisdictions, and so we need to get clearer on mandating here in this country that government asks for required AI resource expenditure, and that we have clear data about what's happening in our data center economy. And I'll just leave one final point around what's possible in terms of renewable energies being used in data centers. We know that when demand is high, And make no mistake, these tools require an enormous amount of resource and energy demand. When demand is high, data centers revert to gas generation power, right? So the idea that we've got a carbon neutral or carbon free future in our near future is fantasy. It's a lie. We are powering these things with very dirty energy in the near future. And that's true for all of the fancy bells and whistles that are being brought out by small nuclear modular reactors, right? So if you're deep in the weeds in this issue and you hear about some of the innovative things that we're doing in the UK, that's great. That is 10 to 15 years out. We're going to burn the planet up between now and then if we don't make a change.
Wow, okay. So we hear the clarion call from the sort of academic side, and the data doesn't typically lie, but we are here and now, and building data centers and accelerating AI is happening. It's reshaping built environments. It's reshaping the way decisions have to be taken in local politics and local governments that people are looking to, both as job creators and also as provision of the services that people need to live well. So Mette, how do you find the balance? There's a lot of implications I'm sure you're trying to tackle within London. How do you find the balance locally? How are you talking to maybe your colleagues and counterparts in other cities around the world to sort of understand how to very rapidly shape some best practices?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And firstly, can I say a massive thank you to the Bellwethers Group for putting on the Nature and Climate House. Really important to be centering this as part of South by Southwest here in London. Look, I think the question about who's paying the price is much more broader, not just when we're talking about data centers, but it's more broadly around the climate crisis. Where we are now in Hackney, where I'm brought up, I'm always honest and I don't make it a secret. I never grew up as someone who would have been classified as like an environmentalist. But partly the reason why I grew to care about this issue is because you only have to look around to see what's happening around the world and how that's impacting working class Londoners, whether it's the insecurities caused by the energy prices because we're dependent on fossil fuels, and every time something happens around the world, it's working class Londoners who are paying the price for something that they've got absolute no control over. And then the implications of that, if you think about pollution and the air that we breathe in our city. When the mayor first got elected in 2016, scientists told him it would take 193 years for us to reach the legal limits of pollution levels here in London. We achieved it in just 9 years. But the sad reality is there are 480,000 Londoners through absolutely no fault of their own who suffer with asthma. So many young black and brown kids who will never ever be able to breathe the full capacity of their lungs because of a crisis that they didn't cause in the first place. So when we're talking about AI and when we're talking about who's paying the bill, this absolutely has to be looked through the lens of social, racial and economic justice. And a big part of what we're trying to do here in London, of course, we recognise the role of data centres and of AI, particularly in terms of our digital economy. But it really builds on Gina's point around how do we make sure that there is a dividend and a benefit for Londoners. If you think about the demand it requires of our energy, we've got massive trade-offs that we've got to make in our city. If you're thinking about the housing need that we have on our city and the impact that has on our grid, and then the impact that has on being able to build those homes, on everything we want to do around zero emission buses across our city. Again, the data centers have a huge impact on that. And so for me, what's really important as part of this conversation is a couple of things. Firstly, it's making sure that we don't end up in a situation where you get these big mega global corporations who are profiting from natural resources whilst Londoners are being expected to pay the price for something that they didn't cause or they've got no benefit over. So there's got to be a real important element of community ownership as part of that. And then the second part of it is about actually thinking about what type of city do we want to live in, right? And if you think about London being a city where it's much more accessible to Londoners, where you've got more nature thriving across our city, you've got better air quality, more cleaner transport, all of these things that we all want to see across our city. It's about making sure that Londoners have a genuine voice in actually being able to shape the future of AI. And for me, the worry I have is that the world of business is moving at 1,000 miles per hour. The world of politics is moving at minus 100 miles per hour. And you end up in this situation where, if we don't put the right framework in place soon enough, it will be something that will be done to people rather than actually working with people. And that's one of the reasons why I got involved in politics very young. Being brought up in Hackney, Hackney is a very trendy and hipster place to live now, as you could see. But when I was growing up, it wasn't like that. And actually, one of the reasons why I got involved in politics was because all of a sudden I saw all of these new job opportunities being created around me, all of these new housing developments. But the question was, for who? Was it for people who looked and sound like me from my area, or was it for people who were just moving into the area? And by the way, we've got absolutely nothing against that. Of course, we want people to come and to live here as well, but at the same time, there has to be equity as part of that. So the point about the question around for who is really important.
Well, thank you very much for your candor, and it's so refreshing to have local politicians who are just genuinely part of the community and on the side of community, and we'll come back to that. Thomas, I mean, you've lived many lives in different guises, and you're now at the most fantastically named think tank that you're leading, the Centre for Future Generations. I mean, these are the big, chewy questions that you guys are helping us as the rest of the community to sort of understand as they evolve. And I guess you're quite concerned with the people who obviously are not here now, but will live with the consequences of what looks cool and exciting and big job creators now. What are and how do you start to look at those implications around the AI infrastructure decisions that are being taken today by corporations who are not thinking like you? How, from their energy commitments to their water use to land agreements, what are you guys looking at, and what's being locked in for future generations that gives you pause?
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and thank you for the compliment on the name, for which I can take no credit. So the think tank's founders came up with this great name, which does sort of give all the work we do this sort of license to look down the generations at the decisions that are being made now and what the impact will be, not just in a year or 5 years, but much longer term. We're based in Brussels as a think tank. A lot of our work is very focused on trying to help the European institutions who are grappling with these problems. And obviously one of the things which comes up a lot is the siloed nature of policy making. So you have often it is innovation departments or even defense and security departments who have very strong interests in or at least have been influenced by the narratives coming from the big tech companies. And you have environment departments, climate departments with their set in stone targets that have to be delivered. There is not a lot in our experience of information sharing between those teams, collective strategy making, foresight processes and so on. And there is not a lot of knowledge about the actual technologies outside very niche teams whose job it is to scale up those technologies within those policy-making departments. So we are sort of set up, if you will, as a kind of back office to policymakers, philanthropically funded, trying to make more of the technical knowledge about what's actually happening and could happen in the future available to the decision makers. I think it's one of the hardest jobs around today to be either a politician or a policy advisor serving a politician, right? It's a really, really challenging job, and we often give our political leaders a lot of stick. But we try and be the empathetic, neutral support service to say, look, this is really hard. We hear you getting screamed at from, on security concerns. We hear you getting screamed at on growth and innovation concerns. But there are also these climate commitments over here that are kind of important too. It wasn't so long ago that if we didn't do climate now, we were all going to die. And now it's if we don't do AI now, we're all going to die. And I find it bizarre that people don't see the parallel in those arguments, and somehow we've shelved the conversation we were having about climate in order to have this new existential threat conversation. So we try and use foresight techniques. We have a lot of people in our organization who are experts in foresight, exploring not just the most probable scenarios, but different possible scenarios, what things are getting overlooked in the policy planning processes, whose voices are being heard, whose voices are not being heard. And I think when we think about these questions, this is not only a question of kind of what's the right answer, but what's the right process to get to that answer, and how are we involving different different groups, different communities that will be affected. Obviously, we can't bring literally the future generations from 100 years' time into the room, but young people is a good proxy for that, and we do quite a lot of work bringing in European youth groups into these conversations that are often very inaccessible to try and ensure that those voices are heard too.
Wow, it's a big and chewy and long, arduous journey ahead. I imagine that will continue to evolve. So Gina, let me turn back to you with that in mind, and you know, the sort of context of both Mete's work and Thomas's more kind of, you know, future-facing work. The present and the future both being deeply impacted by the today. How is your research showing AI already changing work and institutions and perhaps even trust in ways that we may not yet fully understand?
You know, that's a great question. I think I want to just link it to something that was said in the previous panel, because it very well could be this new strapline for the Nature and Climate House, which is policy needs better stories. And right now, the stories we're telling about AI are, we better do this thing, as Thomas just said. The stories we tell about AI are, we better do this or we'll miss out on fill in the blank, right? We'll miss out on the West having supremacy over the rest of the world. We'll miss out on the potential for growth. We'll miss out on, you know, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And the people telling those stories are the ones who are wanting us to put all of our chips in on this bet, on their bet, right? All in on LLM, generative AI growth will be the future. Now, this is not settled science. The science is not clear on that. There are AI researchers, highly respected, award-winning, Stanford's Fei Li, the former head of AI for Meta. These people say, no, wait, we can't get there through this particular technical infrastructure. And yet the companies who are trying to sell this particular technical infrastructure say, no, build more, build it faster. If you don't build it, we will all die, right? The challenge is people don't want it. My team will have a research report out next week that we're sponsoring, parliamentary launch on the 9th of June, that shows the depth of the techlash and here in the UK, and connects that techlash to changing attitudes of voters leaving the Labour Party. Now, if you want to understand the shifting politics in this country, you know, people don't say they're voting on AI, but they are voting on an attitude toward what the future will be. And if we double down and we place our markers, place our bets on big tech, we're not having the conversation that working people want to have about a future that works for them. So right now, when people hear, let's have more AI, what they hear is, AI is going to take your job. When people hear, let's have more AI, what they hear is young people do not have a future in your vision of the future. And when they hear, let's have more AI, they hear there are going to be impersonal decisions in your public services, in your banking, in all of those areas of the economy that are going to be dehumanized and not fair for you. The economy will not work for you. That's what people are hearing across this country. We've got a problem with trust, and if we don't work on slowing our AI expansion down just a bit and thinking about how we get it right, not how we get it fast, but how we get it right, then we're going to miss out on this opportunity.
Wow. Well, let me take that. Mete, I had two questions, but I'm going to roll them into one because after that intervention, I think they could be. But obviously, in a city like London, there's a lot of big firms, they're big employers, they're really important to the city's citizens and tax base, and important for many, many reasons. So big employers we're not against big employers being in our city by any stretch, I'm sure. But in the complex run up to AI excitement and enthusiasm, how does a big city like London balance the needs of serving, being a welcoming place for big business, but also serving the needs of its citizens across a wide socioeconomic spectrum and the trust that they need to build?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the trust question and issue is a real one, and I think actually it plays out in, I see it in my world in politics at the moment. I always say to people, I got into politics because I hated politics growing up. 12 years later, I still hate politics, even though I'm in it. I think there is a real sense of, particularly for young people, feeling like, I reflect on a conversation I had with a young person recently, actually, where they were basically telling me that they were making a decision about whether they should go out on a spontaneous day out to dinner with their workmates. But if they went out that day, then they couldn't go out on the weekend. And then that conversation then led to this whole thing about, Mete, well, I've done everything the system's told me to do, work hard, get a good education, I've played by the rules, but I'm not being rewarded for it. And then you see that playing out in politics, where there is really a sense of, people feeling like, politics and the system just doesn't work for them, full stop. And, it's no surprise to hear that actually some of this more bigger like AI and tech is actually scary for people, because I think people are really worried about their future and where their place is in the future. Look, for London, there's a number of things that we have, levers that we have to put to the right framework in place. One of the things that I'm working on at the moment is on the London Plan. London Plan is, not to get all technical and very boring on it, but it's our biggest, essentially like our planning document for London. It's about how we build homes, where we have green spaces, all of that sort of stuff. And of course, within that context, we're also going to have a data center policy. And within that data center policy, that will be out for public for consultation to have a real engagement to make sure that we've got the right balance on how we can make sure that, one, we can obviously serve our digital economy, create the jobs that we need to, but at the same time, making sure that we're safeguarding against our environmental ambitions here in London, our air quality ambitions, our spaces, our community spaces, all of these things. So there's a number of ways in we do that. And to answer your previous question too, Sharon, around, this isn't just a London problem. This is a global city problem and a global urban problem. And one of the things that we're working with on London is there's an organisation called the C40 Cities. Forgive me if you already know this, but C40 Cities, it's almost like the United Nations for climate change for cities, over 100 cities part of it. The Mayor of London is the co-chair of C40 Cities. And we're currently working together towards the London Climate Action Week, where hopefully you'll see a new pact which will be declared between cities like Melbourne, like Phoenix in the US, London and other cities, where we'll hopefully set out a framework and a blueprint for cities on how do we make sure that we get that balance right.
I think it's going to be an interesting dilemma, because I think we have, I think about 50% of data center builds now are still in the US, and maybe the majority of the other half, if I'm not mistaken, are sort of mainly Europe. But I think that's going to start changing in the global south. So very interested to hear how this discussion evolves. So thank you very much, Mete. Thomas, let me come back to you. So you serve the needs and try and be sensitive to the needs of a wide array of bureaucracy and political environments. Do we have any of the right policy infrastructure and the knowledge suite in place to make the right decisions? Like, how are we helping subnational leaders, national leaders grapple with something that's just sort of popped up in a very short space of time?
No, I think we have all the wrong kind of policy tools, actually. We're in a very 20th century mode of policy making. And exactly as you said, everything's moving very, very fast, and we're still on very long policy review cycles and long consultations. And meanwhile, by the time a consultation is kind of has gone through, you're onto a whole new generation of technology. So I think it is very difficult. We're trying to bring lots more of these sort of foresight techniques into the work that we do, and working also with, there are teams within the European institutions that focus on foresight, but they've been a bit, I think, sidelined in recent years, and we need to bring more of that in, and more cross-departmental policy making, so it's not just, a tech focused division thinking about how do we deliver our thing. You know, we need much more comprehensive work. There was some sort of, I think you do see some positive signs. There is actually within the European institutions a commissioner for intergenerational fairness who has a brief to think about these things, and a cross-cutting brief. And so they have just launched a kind of EU intergenerational fairness strategy. So you do start to see these political windows opening up. The UK, we have Future Generations Commissioner in Wales, I think. I'd love to see that those sorts of political roles in other places. So we do need to think through the policy infrastructures. I think one of the things that makes it hard, though, even with the sort of setup we've got, is we're always talking at this very high level about AI, right? And on my master's, term one of my brilliant master's course at Cambridge was, if it's called AI, somebody is selling you something, point one. And point two, it's not really that artificial. There are people behind this driving an agenda, and there are people working on very low wages in the developing world coding images, and so it's actually not as artificial as you think. And also it's not that intelligent, right? There's all kinds of things we're assuming it can do because the LLMs are very fluent and very confident, but actually they're often wrong. So we have to be super careful when we hear AI, actually what do we mean? And also what is it being used for? I think that, you know, when we go into conversations about AI and data centers, I mean, I'm not a private sector representative, but I spent a long time in the private sector. There will be some great stuff that AI can do, right? And if we want to have a conversation about societal benefits and trade-offs, I think we first have to get clear about what the terms of engagement are for these technologies and what they will be used for. If you want to talk to me about a data center in my backyard that's going to consume resources, if you tell me that that is going to be dedicated to processing of medical data that will find the cure for cancer, I'll be like, okay, I'm up for that conversation about that trade-off. If you tell me it's going to make deep fake porn of, you know, my teenage daughter and all her friends, I'm going to be having a different view. So I think we just bubble all this stuff together as AI, without really having a conversation on what do we want the AI to do, what do we want to create societal license for AI to do, and what don't we want it to do. And we have that in other areas, right? We have that in, you know, you can't sort of register a company on the London Stock Exchange that's going to, you know, create dangerous weapons and throw them around everywhere. There are rules that stop you doing that. But somehow if it's AI, it's okay, and therefore we should just be building it. And I think we've got to regain control of what we mean when we say AI.
I think we've got a couple minutes left, so I want to just turn to each of you and just say one final comment. It can be what you're most thrilled about, what you're most worried about, or what cost you just do not want us to bear. One last thought from each of you on what we should really hold as this conversation evolves.
AI should not cost the UK our economy. And what I mean by that is we have an extraordinary set of resources in really beautiful data in English. That's a useful thing here in the UK. We should not be giving that away simply because some very big wannabe trillionaires in the United States think it's a really good idea to get that data. So if we want to talk about how we do responsible AI and responsible scaling, we look, as the middle power we are, we look at the resource and asset in the AI stack that we have. And we have an enormous talent pool, consumer pool, and data pool. And we build on that. And we can do that as this island nation, and we can do something really exciting. But we can't if we just follow the US down their path.
Thomas?
I think we need to recapture a sense of agency over what's possible and feel that we can describe the future that we want and set the terms of the debate.
Love that. Fantastic. Meta, any final?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is, you know, like, we touched a bit on about it, but I think it's just much more than AI in some ways. I think, you know, on the wider climate ambitions that we have, we've got to really win hearts and minds. We know that there are lots of climate skeptics out there, not least to mention the president of the most powerful country in the world, who, by the way, is very obsessed with the mayor of London. You know, he actually really is obsessed with it. But one of the things that, you know, Donald Trump can't stand about London is that we are a city that is built by immigrants, people who came to this country, built our high streets, built the city that we love. We're a city where, you know, you can be whoever you want to be, love whoever you want to love. And I think the way in which we capture people's hearts and minds, and that's one of the things that me and Sadiq are focused on in here in London, is by making sure that actually we're delivering tangible benefits that could really uplift every single Londoner. And whether it's a conversation around what we're doing around the benefits or reaping the benefits of data centers as much as we can for ordinary Londoners, or whether it's around making sure that we're able to make London a thriving place to live and really setting that ambition that Thomas spoke about around what we want to see happen in our city, you know, breathing cleaner air, having more access to green space, having lower energy bills, having better quality jobs, making sure that every single Londoner is uplifted through that transition. That's our focus here in London, and we've got a massive task on our hand to win people's hearts and minds.
Well, clearly, absolutely, and we'll look forward to learning from your report next week as well. Gina, from your team's work, and we'll be watching on the 9th of June. So just want to thank you all for what your organisations do and what you do individually, and welcome you back next year on this topic and others.
Thank you.